We have a breaking update on the Pentagon's preliminary investigation into a strike on a school in Iran, which killed at least 175 people, most of them children, according to Iranian officials. President Trump blamed Iran before then walking back those comments. And now the New York Times cites U.S. officials saying that the probe shows the U.S. was at fault. Let's bring in MS Now senior national security reporter David Rohde. David, what are we learning?
This is New York Times reporting. MS Now has not been able to verify this on our own yet, but it's a scenario that many people feared. And it's what the Times has been told is that the preliminary investigation by Central Command has found that old data was used in the targeting that occurred. The building that was a school and has been a school for several years in the past was part of this Iranian Revolutionary Guard base. And the mistake was that that information was not updated, i.e. that the building that had been turned into a school was no longer part of the base. And that's something that military planners, should have checked. It's the Defense Intelligence Agency that, provides targeting information. But it fits what people have suspected because it was a series of Tomahawk strikes on the very first day of the war. The U.S. is the only country. Israel does not have Tomahawks that was using Tomahawks against Iran. And it was on the day these attacks started. So it's a tragedy. Many people will believe it was intentional, many enemies of the United States. But as you said, 175 people killed due to this mistake, most of them children.
Remind us, David, what we've heard from the administration on this.
Yes, they've distanced themselves from it. The president himself claimed that many countries use Tomahawk missiles. There are other countries that have Tomahawk missiles, but those are European allies. And so it was just clear from the sequencing of all this where 4 or 5 Tomahawks hit a complex of buildings. But again, and this is sort of also the New York Times based on satellite analysis, sometime between 2013 and 2018, a wall is built. This one building is turned into a school. And in 2018, you can see that there are play areas in satellite photos next to the school. There's other imagery the Times found that shows that the school was painted blue and pink. All of this was missed by targeting officials. It's their job to make sure that they're dealing with up-to-date information and they're checking imagery to make sure that it's a military installation that they've hit. And this will be, it's a preliminary report, but if this is the final conclusion, this will be one of the largest killings of civilians by mistake by American forces in decades. Again, 175 people killed, according to Iranian officials, most of them children.
Day 12 of the war with Iran, here's where things stand. Quote, the president is scared. That is how one Democrat, former Congressman Max Rose, describes Donald Trump right now as he tries to spin a spiraling war that has led to the deaths of 8 U.S. service members and more than 1,200 people across the Middle East, including more than 100 children. Gas prices are right now $3.58 a gallon. That's according to AAA. And today, a leading lobbying group for American farmers is warning of a shortfall in crops and rising prices if the war continues. As for Donald Trump and his administration, they still have not settled on a single set of messages to explain why we are at war right now, what our goals are in the war, or how long they think it will take to achieve those goals and how long the war might last. Writing for the veterans group Vote Vets, Max Rose writes this, quote, there's a Bay of Pigs quality to all of it, not in a tactical sense. Our military is executing with extraordinary professionalism. The parallel is in the dynamic. A president surrounded by hawkish advisors who tell him it'll be quick. The people will rise up and you'll be a hero. JFK learned that lesson the hard way in 1961. Donald Trump is learning it now. There's brand new reporting in the New York Times today that reveals that Donald Trump and his team did indeed massively miscalculate how Iran would respond and react to the attack. From that report, quote, on February 18th, as President Trump weighed whether to launch military attacks on Iran, Chris Wright, the energy secretary, told an interviewer he was not concerned that the looming war might disrupt oil supplies in the Mideast and wreak havoc on energy markets. Some of Trump's other advisors shared similar views in private, dismissing warnings that the second time around, Iran might wage economic warfare. by closing shipping lanes carrying roughly 20% of the world's oil supply. That is precisely what we're living through. That is exactly what has happened and what is happening. Oil prices have soared as Iran seizes control of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran today shooting at 3 ships near the strait. These pictures show the aftermath of a strike on a Thai ship. And there are indications that Iran is now placing mines in the strait to deter any ships from passing through it. CENTCOM said in a post on X yesterday that they struck at 16 mine-laying ships. Team Trump's response to the threat to shipping has been shambolic at best. Energy Secretary Chris Wright, the one who, according to the New York Times, said last month that a war with Iran would not impact oil supply, claimed yesterday in a tweet that the U.S. Navy escorted an oil tanker through the strait, only to delete that post a little bit later. Donald Trump today threatened Iran with, quote, death, fire, and fury, end quote, if the oil supply is threatened. Then today he told reporters that shipping companies should just, quote, use the strait. That's after he told Fox's Brian Kilmeade that ships should, quote, show some guts and just go through the strait. Does that sound like a president with a plan? The Wall Street Journal reports today that one unintended effect of the war is that the brutal, cruel, and tyrannical Iranian regime that was sanctioned to the hilt and cut off from markets all around the world is, for now, empowered in selling its oil. From that Wall Street Journal reporting, quote, Iran is exporting more oil through the Strait of Hormuz than before the war, showing it is in control of a strategic waterway that it has closed off to the rest of the region's oil producers. As Gulf Arab oil producers from Saudi Arabia to Iraq cut production and scramble for new routes that bypass the strait, Iran is conducting business as usual. Donald Trump facing the consequences of the war in Iran is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. New York Times diplomatic correspondent Michael Crowley is back with us. Also joining us, retired U.S. Army Brigadier General Steve Anderson and former Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman is here as well. She led the U.S. negotiating team that reached an agreement on the Iran nuclear deal in 2015. Wendy, I start with you. Ambassador or Wendy? I feel like I mess this up every time.
Wendy is just fine.
Okay. Take me through what I missed in where things stand right now.
I think you summed up a lot. I think there are a few things that people really need to be aware of. We not only have the soldiers who have died, but we have 140 at least who are injured. Because of an American mistake, I think old targeting data is the preliminary thought. We inadvertently killed 168 children and 14 teachers. And we did that at a time when Secretary Hegseth gutted an office that was looking at reforms for the Pentagon of how to not have civilian harm. And he gutted that office because he's all into sort of this rah-rah macho lethality is the way that we ought to conduct ourselves, which is why this is the Department of War under his names, under President Trump's name. I think the other thing is, indeed, China is getting its oil. Iran has continued to go through the strait and get China its oil. The president said he was going to make sure that China got its oil. He was trying to butter up China as he moves toward a summit with Xi in Beijing starting March 31st. But China knows better. All that's happening is Trump is sort of going backwards. And I guess the final two things I would say, Nicole, is when this is over, whenever the president decides it's over, he doesn't just get to decide. Iran has a vote. They could continue to retaliate for what they see as harms. No one would disagree with the fact that Iran is a terrible regime, that it has done terrible things, that it has killed Americans over the years, that it's been really tough. I agree with all of that. But we had drive-by diplomacy that didn't get us to where we needed to be. Instead, the president decided because Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner said, this drive-by negotiation's not getting what we want. Guess we need to go to war. And then finally, the president of Iran today said he needs three things for a ceasefire: an acknowledgement of their need to have a nuclear fuel cycle, reparations for damages, and no further aggression affirmed by the international community. I doubt that President Trump or Prime Minister Netanyahu will agree to that. So I don't see a ceasefire happening anytime soon, because Iran gets to have a vote, and we all will pay the price.
Ambassador, let me ask you a question about your first point. The strike, and I've got the latest New York Times reporting on the strike on the school. An early investigation finds that U.S. was at fault. If one of the objectives, and it's hard to tell based on the administration's public utterances, but if one of them is regime change, I guess one, the Ayatollah's son seems to be regime change in the wrong direction, perhaps someone, younger, savvier, and more brutal. But two, Donald Trump has even spoken directly to the Iranian people. It seems that the early messaging around the strike against the school and blaming Iran I think Trump asked about it today, so he didn't know anything about it. That doesn't seem to support one of their stated public goals. If it really is a goal, I think we don't really know. But just talk about what it does in terms of the people and the hearts and minds of the civilian population who want a better future for themselves if you don't transparently handle a mistaken strike on a child's school.
The United States of America has always held ourselves out to be a country that takes responsibility for the mistakes that we make in war. And we have made many. I grew up during the era of Vietnam, and sort of My Lai was a horrifying, really killing of an entire village. And we took responsibility for that. Colin Powell, who had fought in that war and became the Secretary of State and also chairman of the Joint Chiefs, understood and discussed how important it is for us to be that transparent. And I know that Brigadier General Anderson was taught this when he became a soldier and as people go through this. So for us to not be transparent about this, not to own it, is to really declare that we are not the country who we thought we were and are, and certainly the country I want us to be. I'd say too, Nicole, that there is no doubt that the new supreme leader is brutal. We haven't heard from him. I'm sure he's in a bunker somewhere. There are all kinds of reports about whether he was really devastatingly hurt or only minorly hurt in that first strike. I assume we will hear from him at some point, but we've heard from the president. We've heard from Ali Larijani, who many people believe is running the country at this point. And President Trump has said, we're almost done. We've done this and we've done this. We've gotten rid of their Navy, their missiles, attacked their drone plants. But at the end of the day, quite frankly, although our military has been spectacular, if that is what we have done, Iran can reconstitute that in a matter of months and years. And we will have to be back into a mow the lawn strategy. Nothing about their nuclear program, nothing about the real reason that President Trump said he was doing this at the start, which is to have the back of the Iranian people. And instead, what we're doing is creating a new nationalism in Iran, where people feel they're being attacked. They don't like this regime, but they don't like the attacks either. And they don't like to see 168 kids and 14 teachers dead.
Jail investigates a suspicious inmate death. They look at one, if the inmate took his life, or two, the possibility that somebody killed him. If an inmate's alone until they're found hanging, that means suicide. No one else was there to do it. The jail records video, though, in the area facing Epstein's cell, in the cell area, they had two jail cameras, both failed to record. So there was only one working camera near the cell. That drew headlines at the time. Government defenders, though, cited the remaining camera footage to conclude that they would say no one got near the cell anyway that night. A top Trump FBI official who rose by questioning the Epstein story even echoed that view on Trump's behalf last year.
You're going to see there's no one there but him. There is nothing. If you have it, I'm happy to see it. There's video clear as day. He's the only person in there and the only person coming out. You can see it.
Clear as day. A video showing that could resolve any questions, but the Trump official was wrong. Back with our Epstein death special report. We've been tracking all of the errors in the Trump DOJ's original handling of the case. And then the following administration probed those failures, but ultimately issued the same finding of suicide in a watchdog report from the Garland DOJ in 2023. That 100-page report reviewed the available video cameras footage to conclude the last time anyone came near Epstein's cell was a corrections officer at 10:41 p.m. That's the government conclusion from a detailed probe and report across 2 administrations. That's where the U.S. government would have its stay. But this new law famously forced out the secret internal documents from the same probe, showing other views within the FBI about the last person near Epstein's cell, hidden from the public until now. DOJ said the officer was the last time anyone entered the area. But the Epstein files have revealed a secret FBI log of the same video, which spotted a flash of orange going up the stairs. Inmates wear orange, not officers. The FBI stating a, quote, flash of orange looks to be going up the stairs. Could possibly be an inmate escorted up to Epstein's tier. Now, the FBI's own video review detected that prison orange uniform of a possible inmate. That's big. This review had the evidence, orange that could be an inmate. But we are now learning it was cut, hidden, or accidentally left out of the DOJ report. The new files reveal this never-before-seen set of details about Epstein's area on the night of his death. And we could show you the locked tier around Epstein's cell, 10:39 p.m. that night. A blurry orange figure appears. The original FBI log calls it that flash of orange could possibly be an inmate. And note that careful description, because then the DOJ review of the same footage changes it to write, quote, inmates are currently on lockdown. It's possible someone is carrying inmate linen up the stairs. Now, that's a huge difference. It replaces observation, orange, with conjecture. Inmates are on lockdown, so they shouldn't be around. But the rule that inmates are supposed to be on lockdown doesn't resolve whether one wasn't, just like Epstein was supposed to get those 30-minute checks, but didn't, that I told you about. Now, the DOJ's change prevents questions about that orange flash and if the jail made another mistake. And the public report by the DOJ hides this dispute over the orange flash. It states that an officer appears to walk up the stairway. CBS's Daniel Rudnick first documented this in a report. Who entered Epstein's jail tier the night of his death? Newly released video logs appear to contradict official accounts. And independent experts telling CBS the video is more consistent with someone wearing an orange prison uniform than a corrections officer. The fact is, the DOJ's own watchdog report minimized the FBI evidence. That is just a fact. Now, people can debate why. Was that a good faith mistake or a malicious cover-up? Even videos suggesting an inmate on the loose does not resolve questions around Epstein's death, but it would be another rule violation, and it would add to the evidence suggesting you need a deeper investigation of potential foul play. Now, that was the only camera angle working, shown here on this map. The DOJ report notes recording failures do predate this Epstein probe. There was a history there, and the only working camera that covers a common area outside the entrance to Epstein's general area is here. There isn't video from that better camera that pointed down Epstein's hallway. Now, back in our timeline, moments after Epstein was found dead, the new files for the first time allow us to see the area footage at the moment of that discovery. A figure moving from the desk in the upper left corner towards Epstein's tier and then returning quickly. We see increasing activity. The video adds to the picture of how jail staff responded. Doesn't look like it was an expected event, some giant conspiracy, at least for the officers on the scene. You can see it gets chaotic. They're moving around outside Epstein's tier. But the FBI then didn't arrive for 7 hours. And that's a problem because by then guards had removed Epstein's body. The cell was in disarray. The crime scene tainted under Trump DOJ authority. And the feds didn't fingerprint or DNA test materials in the cell, which is basic forensics to check if others were in the cell or touched items. The jail had control of the scene, but mismanaged the evidence. How bad was it? Well, officers found Epstein with a noose around his neck. But by the time they were done tainting the crime scene, the feds were never even able to establish which noose killed Epstein. There were several nooses fashioned from the clothing. Investigators said they did conclude one handmade noose you see here was not the one used. That's odd. The original account says a guard literally ripped the cloth away when they found Epstein hanging, and then CPR. So the new files reveal the underlying evidence from this probe, and the government expected that stuff to stay secret. They never expected that we'd be on the news telling you about it. Like one guard recounting that he didn't recall taking the noose off. I really don't. We can also tell you that after the death, 2 officers were put on leave. Within a week, the medical examiner did state the cause of death was suicide by hanging, mentioning no evidence of defensive wounds that might be part of an attack. The examiner also reviewed footage and thought it was just too blurry to draw conclusions. The new files show they also delayed that ruling on suicide for more review because of Epstein's status. A forensic pathologist hired by Epstein's brother, Dr. Baden, also looked over the autopsy and had a different conclusion, determining injuries on Epstein's neck were closer to, quote, strangulation than suicide. Now, Baden once served as chief medical examiner in New York. Months later, as we go to the timeline, the DOJ indicted the guards on duty that night for lying about the inmate checks that never happened. That's a big deal. It added pressure, though, for those guards to cooperate in the probe, and the DOJ later dropped those same charges. We are learning the FBI heard from an inmate who said that officers were heard discussing covering up Epstein's death in some manner. That was reported just this week by the Miami Herald's Julie K. Brown. There was heat on the Trump DOJ over what you can now see was a debacle that looked even worse over time. And in the middle of the probe, Trump Attorney General Barr made an unusual announcement that he said he watched the jail footage. He ruled out anyone entering the cell or foul play. This was days after the guards were first indicted, Barr giving his case. But there were so many failures, he didn't deny them, including, of course, the video recording. He just said the jail had a, quote, perfect storm of screw-ups. Years later, the DOJ report documents those failures, but avoided any mention of the crucial conflicting evidence I just showed you tonight, the flash of orange, whether a person or even an inmate was on the loose near Epstein's cell area. Now, it can be reasonable to make an investigative finding that it's unlikely anyone still entered Epstein's locked cell that night. Or you could state that the total evidence just doesn't suggest it. But Trump officials who oversaw these problems in 2019 and the Biden-Garland DOJ later issuing the report, okay, they went farther. They basically stretched to try to tamp down the growing public concerns. We've heard about a cover-up being sometimes worse than the original incident. Well, ironically, that kind of strained overreach can feed questions about government secrecy, cover-ups, or even foul play. The CBS investigation noted the jail camera angle means it's just not possible to rule out if someone could have climbed the stairs and entered that tier. And this new law has forced out all these documents. It's made the DOJ finally show its work, and that's driving these fresh questions. Autopsy and 2 administrations did state Epstein took his own life, suicide. But other insiders disagree, several saying they don't think Epstein took his life, including his brother, Ghislaine Maxwell, and the pathologist I mentioned. And some of those claims can be suspect as his defenders or even conspirators, but that's their view. And a former Trump attorney who Epstein hired in August, the same month as everything I just showed you, said, I don't think he committed suicide. He was very engaged in fighting the case. He had basically just hired me to kill himself 9 days later. Wouldn't make sense. So let me take this all together tonight. We live in a time of agendas and conjecture and rush narratives. The truth is usually slower and more complex. Epstein's life was a criminal conspiracy, and his death became a mystery, first plagued by the Trump DOJ failures, then heightened by government secrecy across 2 administrations. This new transparency and evidence undercuts some of those past claims. It clearly shows the need for a fuller, investigative, independent accounting from Epstein's crimes to his time in custody. And as of this hour, it does not yet provide definitive proof for how his life ended.
And he has repeatedly made completely contradictory statements about his plans for this war and how long it will be. And every time he is asked which of his diametrically opposing statements is actually U.S. policy, he just shrugs his shoulders and says it's both.
You've said the war is, quote, very complete, but your defense secretary says this is just the beginning. So which is it, and how long should Americans be prepared?
Well, I think you could say it both.
For?
You just said it is a little excursion, and you said it is a war. So which one is it?
Well, it's both. It's both.
It literally cannot be both, but it's always both, even though it logically cannot be. And this just keeps happening. I mean, every day we get a news statement that contradicts the last thing they said. For example, here was Secretary Hegseth during an interview with 60 Minutes on Sunday.
Well, we're not flying a mission accomplished banner like George W. Bush on an aircraft carrier. We're not doing that, and we haven't done that.
Okay, no mission accomplished banner for us. We're not doing that. We haven't done that. Well, Donald Trump didn't have a banner at his rally today in Kentucky, but he did say this.
Well, it's only good if you win. You know, you can only do. And we've won. Let me say, we've won. You know, you never like to say too early you won. We won. We won the bet. In the first hour, it was over.
Does it feel like we've won? Trump says we won. It was over in the first hour. That sounds pretty mission accomplished to me. All of this would be, well, concerning because he's the leader of the free world. Some of it is funny. If the consequences weren't deadly serious, and I've thought about this all day today and who I really wanted to talk to today. I've talked to so many smart public officials who are doing everything they can to hold this administration accountable. We'll continue to do that. But tonight, I really want to spend some time with people who I have actually sat with in the Situation Room and who I know have spent hours in these rooms to just really help unpack everything that is happening and not hold back in any way. Michael McFaul is the former U.S. ambassador to Russia during the Obama administration. Ben Rhodes was deputy national security advisor to President Obama. There's always so much to say each of these days, of these last 12 days, that we have all been covering and talking about this war. And I'm going to try to get to all of it, but I hope you will bring up things that have struck out to you, too. Ben, just a couple of hours after Donald Trump said we won, we got some breaking news from Reuters. 3 sources familiar with the matter tell Reuters that U.S. intelligence indicates that Iran's leadership is still largely intact and is not at risk of collapse anytime soon. And this is just yet another one of these reports that we see every day where I think back to all of the hours you both, I spent some time in them, but you spent more time in them, spent in contingency meetings to discuss what would happen if you did things like struck Iran. And I just wonder, with that news and just everything you're seeing, kind of how you assess where we are at this moment.
I think where we are, Jen, is that Donald Trump wants this to play out like on his own terms, on his own timelines. And that's not at all what's happening in Iran. It's not what's happening in the region, and it's not what's happening around the world. And all of what's happening is predictable. I did sit in contingency meetings about this exact scenario, a war with Iran, over a decade ago, and all of these things would happen. So first of all, the Iranian regime is not one man. It's not the 86-year-old supreme leader. It is a deep and ideological machinery that cannot be destroyed in 2 or 3 or 4 weeks of airstrikes. Full stop. The most heavily armed, there are millions of people under arms in the Iranian system. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, is the most powerful force inside of Iran. They're the ones that are going to emerge in any kind of power vacuum. They have. They're the ones who are backing Ali Khamenei's son as the new supreme leader. They're not going to give up power. They're just not. And maybe Iran will fracture into some civil war, but they'll be fighting in that civil war. You've now had the war spread to over 10 countries in the region. Lebanon has nearly 1 million people displaced because of the Israeli bombardment there. Israelis are in bomb shelters. The Gulf has been devastated by strikes against not just military but civilian targets as well. The oil is not flowing through the Straits of Hormuz. 20% of the world's energy goes through there. So that's a global problem. Americans have spent over $10 billion. The economic cost to the world is probably tens and tens, if not over $100 billion. Donald Trump does not control these things. Israel has a vote. The Iranians have a vote. What other actors in the region do have a vote. So this thing is way beyond his control, and they're not going to achieve their objectives of replacing the Iranian regime or getting unconditional surrender. That's not going to happen in a 2 or 3 week air campaign.
One of the, as I just said, it seems like he thinks he can just shout things out and the world's going to follow, and that's not how things work. It's not how war works. Not how anything works. Let me ask you, Ambassador McFaul, about one of the things, the pieces of news I just talked about that we learned today that isn't particularly surprising given all the details that were out there in public reporting, but just that the preliminary investigation into that strike on that school in Iran found the U.S. was likely responsible. And Trump basically said, and I just played this clip, he didn't know anything about it. I mean, I kind of said there's no president who wouldn't know anything about it. But put in play, I think this is being kind of brushed over a little bit, the significance of this type of civilian casualty. You've sat in a lot of these meetings. You've been in these conversations with presidents. Talk to us a little bit about this type of civilian casualty impact and what the typical conversation would be in a moment like this.
Well, of course, there would be an investigation. There would be a report. The president would be briefed every minute of the day on this. For the president that we all worked with, let's be clear about what you said earlier in the setup. It's absurd that he just shrugs and says, I don't know anything about that. Both worlds are bad, right? If he doesn't know anything about that, why is his team not briefing him? And if he does and he's lying about it, that's equally bad. But the second part, I just find it immoral, the way he talks about it. And I want to stress this. I'm so glad you're focused on this particular piece of this very complex war that we're in. We're just blowing over it like it doesn't matter to anybody. It matters to me. It matters to my friends. It matters to my Iranian American friends that I just celebrated Nowruz with last night, who cannot stand this regime. I want to make that clear. You can be totally against this horrible repressive regime and also be outraged by kids in their homeland being killed. And we don't seem like our president of the United States doesn't express any remorse at all. It is appalling, and it makes us look weak. It makes us look like other thugs in the world. Vladimir Putin talks this way. Why are we now, the United States of America, talking this way? I think it has really big long-term damage to our reputation that people in the White House are not thinking about.
Such an important point. The world sees it. Leaders in the region see it. Our allies see it. Partners see it. Adversaries see it. And they see the reaction and the flippancy through which the president is responding. Let me ask you, Ben, you mentioned the Strait of Hormuz. I tried to just do kind of a quick summary of that and the impact here. I mean, Trump is telling these shipping companies to have some guts. It seems pretty clear from what Senator Chris Murphy said and some reporting from within the White House that they didn't think this would be a real issue, that they didn't plan for it being shut down in this way. How do you see this? What do you think could happen? They obviously missed a lot here, but give us your assessment of that.
Well, again, in any conflict scenario with Iran, this is always something that you plan for. It's not a surprise at all. Again, so 20% of the world's energy flows through, fossil fuel energy flows through the Straits of Hormuz. That's from Qatar, that's from the UAE, that's from Bahrain, that's from a number of these Gulf countries. And what the Iranians can do is a couple of things. One is they can just kind of threaten to blow tankers out of the water. Right. And maybe take out a couple. And we've seen reports that they have hit a number of tankers. And so therefore, the shipping companies, they don't want to do that. Understandably, they don't want to go through the straits if it's being targeted. Then what happens is you also have some of the producers say, well, we're going to turn off the production because we can't ship this out. So Qatar, for instance, has turned off one of the largest liquid natural gas fields in the world because they can't export their energy. Then the biggest problem that could happen that we've seen reports of in the last couple of days is Iran could lay mines in the Straits of Hormuz. So it's not even just that they're firing weapons. It's that if you're running a tanker through there, you don't know if you're going to hit a mine or not. And that could have devastating consequences, and already has, for the price of oil in the world. That's going to show up at the pump for Americans. By the way, let's be clear who this benefits. Mike's on with us. Vladimir Putin is going to make a lot more money, because already he's making more money on the oil that he is selling because the price of oil is higher. He's been given a waiver by the Trump administration to sell oil to India, and so he's making tons of money off of that. And in the long run, if we can't get this energy flowing, other countries, maybe even in Europe, might have to start buying Russian oil again. So this has all kinds of domino effects in terms of geopolitics. And I think another thing that people have to understand is if the war ended tomorrow, it would still take weeks to restart all that production, to restart that flow of ships through the Straits of Hormuz. If it is mined, it could take months, right? So this could be serious, devastating economic impacts to the global economy and to Americans paying higher prices. And the fact that they didn't think this through, that they're somehow surprised that something that anybody who's looked at a potential war with Iran knew the Iranians would do if they wanted to impose a cost on the rest of the world. And this is amateur hour. It's as Mike said, it's immoral that we have a commander-in-chief that doesn't care that. I want a commander-in-chief who cares about U.S. troops and Iranian school children, not just the price of oil, which Trump seems to be obsessed with. But he's obsessed with that without understanding that what he started is hurting Americans and hurting people around the world because of energy prices.
Also, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. You can look at a map and see where the Strait of Hormuz is located.
So lay of the land, if you will. What's next in this fight?
Well, to be clear, first, thank you for having me. And they're suing me because I wouldn't give them the voter rolls that they are asking for in violation of not just state law, but the Privacy Act of 1974. And the subpoenas that were recently served subpoenaed the Cyber Ninja data from that crazy fraud thing that they had going here in Arizona 5 or 6 years ago. What is going on right now is a full frontal assault against the single most popular voting method in Arizona by a long shot, and that is ballot by mail voting, created by Republicans, supported by Republicans, until one particular Republican lost. And oh, by the way, in 2024, I presided over the Electoral College where 81% of the vote came in and Donald Trump won that election. So to say that ballot by mail is problematic for Republicans when they gain seats in our state house and Senate is a really big stretch. Most Arizonans love it. It's more secure. It's more affordable. And that's really kind of the state of the state in Arizona when it comes to it. We love our ballot by mail. We have ID at the polls. We have documented proof of citizenship. Every ballot is cast on paper. This is really kind of the dream state for these folks. And to try to impose this on all of the other states who would have to, it would cost them tens of millions of dollars. In fact, in Arizona, to switch to away from ballot by mail voting, there's no money for it. Like, are they going to fund this thing? Like, that's kind of the real governance, responsible way to look at these things that just doesn't work. And oh, by the way, the Brennan Center has indicated that up to 22 million Americans will not be able to vote if the SAVE Act passes. And I've seen studies that show that the biggest hurt will be as against Republican women. And that's really problematic politically for the president. That's probably why the Republicans in the Senate don't want to pass this thing. It's a hot mess.
So you've said previously you'd rather go to jail than comply with the DOJ's request for voter data. So I wonder what your thought process was when you heard the state Senate had handed over reams of voting information to the FBI under that grand jury subpoena. What are your concerns overall here?
Well, first and foremost, we haven't seen the subpoena, so we don't know exactly what information was turned over. If it was cast vote records and ballot images and all of that extra stuff, that's fine. Nobody can do anything about that. The election is well done and gone. My concern isn't even with the publicly available voter data, names, addresses, party affiliation. That's available with a public records request, which, by the way, the Department of Justice has never asked for. What I am concerned with is the other part of the voter rolls, and that is the sensitive identifying information, driver's license numbers, whole or part of Social Security numbers, mother's maiden name, day and month of birth. These are the sensitive parts of the information that I'm fighting to protect from the Department of Justice. And by the way, they've lost their lawsuits to get this information in several states already. And they've sued even Republican states who are trying to protect this information. West Virginia, Utah, and several others. We are not in this alone. This is a Democratic and Republican Secretary of State fight against an overreaching Department of Justice. And what scares me the most about this is the Department of Justice may have used this criminal grand jury to end around active litigation in Arizona to bypass the judge so that they can just get the information anyway. And there are several other complicating factors about that information and how it's different than what the information shows now because of some motor vehicle problems with record keeping that we've discovered in the interim. And so the danger here is the abuse of bad information, the abuse of not well cataloged information, and around the Department of the judiciary by the Department of Justice. This whole thing stinks to high heaven, but we are going to continue to fight, get to the bottom of it. But I want Arizona voters to understand, we don't know if your personal identifying information has been a part of this. This is one of the key pieces of information we're trying to find out, because I'm going to continue to protect that as long as I'm the Secretary of State.
And of course, Arizona isn't the only state that's concerned about this. And I don't know if you heard the segment we had before you, but there's this split in the Republican Party. While they're looking at messaging, while folks on the Hill are looking at messaging, Donald Trump seems to be very interested in process. And that's why you see this voting act. But the Democratic National Committee is actually suing the federal government, demanding to know whether the president has plans to send armed officers to election sites. That's just one of the concerns that's been raised. Do you have concerns about what the federal government might do come election in November, and are you preparing for it?
Well, I heard the part earlier about what Senator Padilla's reaction was to the possibility, for example, of the president declaring an emergency. The president has about 134 different emergency powers under which he can declare an emergency. None of them include an emergency that would stop elections. Let me say that again. The president can declare emergencies in a variety of different spaces, but not as to the administration of elections. That is a state duty. And so that is off the table, 100% off the table. I don't know a court in the land that, I mean, look, we've always had elections, Civil War, world wars, during the Spanish flu, during COVID, during hurricanes and floods across the United States of America. Election administrators always come through. These are your county clerks, those folks that work the polling places. We've had folks in Arizona that will spend the night before in a polling place because they didn't know if the roads were going to be too muddy the next day to get to serving their voters. This is the dedication of American poll workers at the county level, at the local level. We will not cancel our elections based on a bogus emergency order coming out of this White House. This is the true grit of American poll workers and county election officials across the United States of America. So he can declare an emergency for a bunch of stuff, but we will have midterm elections in 2026, come hell or high water, as we have before, and American democracy will prevail regardless of the political outcomes, which folks like me really only care about as it pertains to our own reelection.
Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, thank you very much.